So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Luis Suarez. Hi, Luis.
Hi Adrian, how are you?
Very well. Just so I'm clear, is it Luis or Lewis?
I actually answer to both of them, so don't worry.
Fine. Uh, Luis is linguistically correct, if I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
that's correct. Yes,
Fine, we'll go with Luis then.
perfect.
So, Luis, tell us a bit about you and the work that you do.
Okay. My name is Luis Suarez. I work for IBM Spain. I've been now working for IBM for around 16 years. And I have all along been working in the area of traditional knowledge management, remote collaboration, online communities. And the last 13 years, I have been involved with social networking. I'm currently working within the CIO organization
Uh-huh.
as the lead social business enabler for enterprise social software platform. So I'm responsible for helping develop and execute the adoption and enablement programs that we have in the company to help fellow colleagues adapt to all of this new wave of social technologies that we have in order to collaborate and share knowledge more effectively.
Fantastic. Now, this interview came about because I posted something on my blog, an article that talks about sustaining businesses successfully through employee engagement, and that we had a bit of a Twitter exchange, and that led to this interview. Now, can you tell me, because you said to me, "Oh, that's really great, and there's a lot to think
Mm-hmm.
about and things," and we traded a few messages. But can you tell me what were your thoughts around the article and the whole subject of employee engagement? Because I think it's central to a lot of the things that you do.
Right. Well, it is. It's actually, the way I say it, and this goes back, and I have been saying this for around 2, 3 years now.
Hmm.
There was a study in 2011 by Gallup where they were confirming that in the corporate America, and I think that we can translate that to everywhere in the world.
Hmm.
Right now, there are 70% of the employee workforce is totally disengaged with work.
Yeah.
Now that's a serious problem. That
Yes.
tells me that 7 out of 10 people don't care what they do at work. So whenever people tell me that what's the number one business problem today, and
Hmm.
people tell me about whatever issues, processes driven, technology driven, and they forget that, I say to them, no, that's your number one business problem. The fact that you have people who do not care about your business.
Yeah.
That's very serious. So the whole thing about employee engagement to me is right where it is, or at the heart of the matter in terms of the ultimate goal for many business, which is delighting your customers. If your employees are not happy, if your employees are not engaged, your customers are not going to be happy. Your customers are not going to be engaged. It's as simple as that, right?
It's
Or at least I say it in that simple term.
yeah.
What's interesting though is that whenever you talk to businesses around about employee engagement, and this is the reason why I really love that article because I thought it hit on the nail, and it touched on a number of ugly issues that no one seems to want to face.
Hmm.
Is the thing is that when we talk about employee engagement, the vast majority of businesses see it as a one-way street versus
Yes.
a two-way street.
Yeah.
And the problem that I have with the first item is that most businesses feel like employees should be happy and lucky enough they have got a job.
Yes.
And the way I say it is the other way around. Businesses should be happy that they have got professionals working for them doing professional work,
Hmm.
right? And that they should go the extra mile to retain that talent and to make that talent is happy and content and fulfilled, and that they have got a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning for what they do, which is essentially providing better customer service,
Yeah.
right? Now, when you look into it, and this is what I liked that particular blog post, is because it mentions some of the various different current issues that we have and some of the potential solutions,
Hmm.
right? And the main issues that we have is how it is only looked into that one-way street, where in most cases people are not feeling enough autonomy or enough freedom to make their own decisions,
Yeah.
right? So most organizations are still very hierarchical, very top-down driven,
Hmm.
right? There's also the situation where people, and this is something that it comes as a shock when I mention it to people, but I see it like that every day with customers that I talk to, and in some areas within IBM as well. People are not having access to enough information as they think they are,
Yeah.
right? So there's still this culture that knowledge is power. And
Yes.
plenty of people retain that knowledge. And unfortunately, in most organizations, it happens to be with the management layer. The
Yes.
management layer wants to control the environment. And the best way to control the environment is to control information,
Yeah.
right? And obviously employees don't like that because, they like the vision, they like the overall strategy of the company. They cannot make their own decisions because they don't have the right information, and they cannot collaborate effectively because they don't have that information in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, if you move into the context of the social web, that completely changes the whole game because people are starting to share the knowledge for the sake of sharing the knowledge, learn and collaborate.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, management, whatever layer, middle managers, first line managers, executives, they all feel displaced, right? And they keep coming back to that employee engagement in terms of like saying, I want my employees engaged. And say, yeah, sure, but shouldn't you actually be doing your fair bit as well as part of that equation?
Yes.
And that's not happening. And that's not happening at least at the level that it should be happening. And what I liked about that blog post is that it highlighted a number of various different areas that could be touched and it should be addressed, but also from that two-way street versus that one-way perspective.
I think the thing that you said, and it's really interesting. It touches on some thoughts that I have on the whole issue as well. Is that you talk about it being a one-way street, and I see lots of firms that are looking to hire people that are employee engagement managers and things. But then what they end up doing is they end up doubling up that they go, you're an internal communication kind of manager, but also employee engagement sort of manager as well. And it seems to me that people are actually they're still thinking about when they do that, rather, they're still thinking about the employee engagement is all about just communication and also broadcast communication. And that really worries me, because it's actually what people are thinking. It seems to be they're thinking about, say, if we do more of this, then we'll get more engagement. But I actually me personally, I think engagement is more about, you're right, it's a two-way street, but it's also about behavior and less about what you kind of do, as it were, as a corporate organization.
And this is a great point, because just because you're communicating more doesn't necessarily mean that you're communicating well or relevant or according to the needs of the actual stakeholders, right? In this case, your employees. And in some cases, it works the opposite just as well, right? The less you communicate, the more freedom you will be giving people to actually do other things, right? So, no, I agree with you. And actually, one of the interesting things about it is that, and this is what I mean as well with employee engagement being just corporate driven, right?
Yeah.
Or corporate top-down driven. So here is corporate communications telling you about all of this stuff that is supposed to just keep you engaged. And when you go and start talking about it on internal social networking tools or externally, they feel uncomfortable because you're having those conversations. And we go like, excuse me? Like what? What are you saying? I mean, you're basically just opening up the channel of conversation. So the least that we could do is just make it happen, right?
Yeah.
So from the transition that you see, or from the trend that you're seeing there in terms of those employee managers and everything else, or engagement managers and everything else, one of the interesting things that I find here, which I think is also part of the problems about why we have such a high percentage of employee disengagement, is how much we let business be driven by inertia, right?
Right.
Basically, taking the status quo as it is just because it's been running like that for decades and not challenging it enough from the perspective of saying, are we really doing the right thing? Because, when I look into it, and if you look into all of these communications, people that, talk to about employee engagement from that manner or in that way, they tell you that it's all about communications, but when you actually challenge them and you tell them, have you stopped to think what people think about your own communications? Have you asked them openly to tell them, okay, so what do you guys think about it? And the answers that I get is, no, we haven't. I say, like, I know you haven't, and I know why, because you don't want to face the ugly truth.
Yeah.
That people don't care what you do. Simple as that, because you're not giving them any reason to think otherwise, right? And one of the things that I keep saying as well is that inertia is probably the worst thing that we can have in a corporate environment, because we're not allowing for enough challenging of the status quo to take place. And that obviously, that challenging of the status quo means that people need to have that ability to change. And I think that you were spot on in terms of what the challenge is, changing your behavior. If you cannot change your behavior, you won't be able to influence and model those all the new ways of working, those new habits, those eventually that new mindset that you may want to go and bring forward.
I think also, I mean, I would go further and say yes, it's about changing the behaviour, but we also have to go even further back and actually think about how organisations, like you had touched on earlier, how organisations perceive their employees. Because right now, if taking a more traditional approach, it seems that organisations and leadership tend to perceive their employees as a bit like children. Then you talk at children to tell them what to do, rather than actually having a more mature relationship where it's actually you engage in a conversation kind of with them about stuff that is meaningful for both of you.
Well, I'm going to disagree on that one.
Okay.
And I'm not going to disagree from your point of view in terms of how they treat people as children. I'm actually going to be a bit more aggressive than that. I think that they treat people like objects, like resources.
Well, okay,
people
that's fine.
People that you can dispose of whenever you feel that you no longer need them. Right?
Yes.
Never mind whatever they have done in the past. Never mind their commitment. Never mind their loyalty. Never mind the trust they had in you. Never mind whatever the thing that you sold to them in the first week when they started working in the company.
Yeah.
And this is what really bugs me about it, because everyone, when we talk about all of these social networking tools, and everyone keeps saying how communications and marketing and sales, they're all benefiting from it. I'm saying that there's one huge, massive, giant pink elephant there in the room that no one wants to face, which is essentially HR not doing that transformation.
Yeah.
Right? And what, to me, if you look into HR, human resources. So you treat people as resources, as objects. So once you don't need them, you just move on. And, that's when we start thinking about layoffs, and then when we start thinking about reducing the workforce or whatever else, without thinking of the implications of, are we doing the right thing? Are we actually, keeping our top talent?
Yes.
As opposed to just blindly go and pick up people by lottery and say, okay, you out, right?
Yes.
I would love for HR to understand that if they're really serious about employee engagement, it's about human relationships.
Yes.
Not human resources. And it's how you manage those relationships. And I can tell you something very clear. Firing off people, laying off people is not the best way to manage relationships.
No.
Right? And especially when it's so indiscriminated, right? And I know, we have all seen that all over the place, all over the news for all of the major corporations, and then you find and you bump into other news items that tell you about how social they are, about how much they're driven by social business initiatives and strategies and everything else. And all of a sudden they go and you hear the next piece of news where they have fired X amount of people.
Yes.
And I go and tell them, okay, so here's something that I need to at least maybe I need to create for myself, right? If you talk to me about social business, and that implies obviously the margin of talking about employee engagement and engagement in general, you would probably say that social business is all about people.
Mm-hmm.
That they are at the forefront, right? So why do you keep firing them? I mean, it may be just me. I mean, my personal opinion on this, but that bugs me and tremendously, because it's like you do one thing and you say another thing, versus walking the talk and say, if your focus is on the people, focus on the people. Focus on retaining that talent, on sort of like educating that talent on how they can become better. That you may need to reshuffle the workforce because, you may need to have all the growth areas or whatever else. Educate them, train them, right? Spend the time on that talent. We haven't seen it, and this is something that I found particularly interesting in Europe and here. We're having a problem that, I don't know why I don't know, maybe just me, the only one who sees that problem, but very soon, there's the vast majority of the corporate workforce right now in Europe is going to retire.
Yes.
And we don't have young talent to cover for that. So I'm talking to businesses and telling them, so what are you going to do? So how are you going to prepare your new blood when you don't even have blood anymore?
Yes.
Right? And they tell me, oh yeah, well that's a problem that I will have like in 3-5 years. No. I said, you have that problem now, because the people who are going to be retiring, the least thing that they're going to be interested in is in transferring their knowledge, because they're on their way out.
Yes.
So it's not something that you will have to start thinking about 3-5 years. Something that you start working now. In fact, you are too late already into the game, right? And that this all comes back to me in terms of that employee engagement, in terms of how you prepare and retain that talent, and by giving them an opportunity to refocus, to find their meaning on their purpose if they haven't got it so far, but also to invest enough in them to help them realize that they are the key primal engine of their businesses, right? And the fact that we're not seeing that is a serious issue because, like I said before, to give you an example, right? And this may be, I don't know, maybe perhaps a bit too localized, but I think that it can also be extended to the rest of the European Union. Over here in Spain, you probably all know about the unemployment rate being very high, right? Youth unemployment is massive. It's on the brink of 58%.
It's tragic,
right? Which basically tells me all of these businesses, and obviously the average in the European Union is a lot lower, but I think it was around 27% or something like that, which is not banal either, right? It's there. That's a serious issue, which tells me then, from all of these corporate executives and everything else, what are you going to do when you need to start looking for replacing your employee workforce that is aging, that is about to retire, and the young talent that you have got there? You first have to ensure that they have got the right talent. But then again, you have to play the game for employee engagement with them. Because for them, employee engagement is something completely different than to baby boomers.
Yeah.
Baby boomers were looking into the lifetime long career, right? These younger generations, they don't. They don't even care to be in the company more than 5 years in your company, right? So how are you facing that employee engagement from that perspective? And, time and time again, when I talk to companies, they tell me like, oh, we haven't looked into that. I'm so like, so when are you going to start?
Yeah.
Because it's a serious issue. It's like you're not, and this is what I really like about the blog post originally that you've mentioned, because it introduces a key message for me there, which is sustainable growth.
Yes.
Right? It's how are you going to provoke sustainable growth for your business and stop thinking about quarter by quarter, stop thinking year for year, think about 10, 15, 20 years, because you will still want to be in business, right? And in a way, I mentioned that as well selfishly to myself, because I still have got like 30 years to work.
Yes.
Right? And I go like, my God, that's like 3 decades. I mean, is this the kind of business world that I want to work in, say 10, 15 years? Of course not, right? And that's the reason why, to some people I may appear a bit radical and the outlier and challenging the status quo. And I keep telling them, is that if we don't challenge it, we won't move, we won't progress, and we will be in trouble. And I don't want to be in trouble.
Wow.
Right? At least not that kind of trouble.
Well, so tell me this then. Given that you speak to a number of different companies, I mean, here's my hope, that is. You must have seen some companies that are doing some pretty good things, and that works really well for them to actually engage with that whole issue, and actually pardon the pun, but actually can engage their employees and their customers, and actually start to build that sustainable growth platform.
I wish I had better news, but I don't. Right. I mean, I like I said before, I talk to lots of different companies, and the ones that I see where they're taking it more seriously are small and medium businesses versus the large corporate world. The large corporate world is just basically about to implode on its own, and it's about to implode on its own because it's thinking that it will always have that power position that it has been having over the last 150 years. And very soon they're going to find out that they no longer have the power, because one of the things that they don't realize about it is that the more people they fire, the weaker they become, because the less people that were working for them. So they no longer have the mass power, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's it's fascinating, particularly from your perspective. But so is this something that at IBM that you guys are sort of getting more and more involved with, because it's that you see that's the future of underpinning the sustainable growth, and it's not just about the technology and the process and the systems and the strategy, which is if you like, the traditional market and also toolkit for big consulting firms.
Right. Well, I can tell you that we are, and not just from the perspective of internally, but also with conversations that we're having with customers. Right. In fact, if you look into it, that was the whole point behind Connexa as an acquisition, right? Where it allows you to introduce a whole concept of a smarter workforce, which is very much related in terms of how do you retain talent along with that employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, inside of the company, we have got a couple of very different departments within HR that are actually looking into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
What happens though is that we're not there yet,
Yeah.
right? And I can tell you that, for instance, what I really like about it is that we have started the journey already.
Right.
Are we at the end of the journey? No, we're not, right?
No.
But that's what I find really interesting, because you have an opportunity to continue learning as you move forward, right? So right now, employee engagement is a huge thing for us, right?
Yeah.
And more than anything else, because we have been saying how we may not have done it right all along,
Mm-hmm.
right? At least that's my personal perspective as an employee, right? That there's certain things that are happening, but there's certain other things that are not happening,
Yeah.
right? And the idea there is that at least we're starting to provoke the challenge, or we're starting to challenge the status quo of how certain things are taking place. So eventually, what's going to happen is that we will see it taking place. I would suggest that within the next 2 years.
Okay.
2 years before, because if we don't manage to make it happen within the next 2 years, we will be suffering.
Yeah, and then some of the smaller sort of businesses might actually come with better solutions, and
That's right, and not only that, it's a situation where all of that talent that we have now and all of that huge expertise will be gone.
Yeah.
Right. And and this is what I keep telling people about, when when you face things that are like the ugly elephant that I mentioned earlier on in the room, and everything else. One of the interesting things that is happening there is that it's all around your experts, right?
Yes.
Your subject matter experts, and if you start losing all of that expertise, eventually you become redundant.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because people don't go to your company because of your company. They go to your company because of your expertise,
Yes.
right? And whatever products and solutions you have, but eventually because of your expertise. And the reason for that is because you like to talk to people who have got the right talent to meet your needs as a business.
Well,
right?
exactly.
And if you don't have that, people will just walk away into wherever you are. And one of the interesting things that is happening, that I'm seeing as a trend, is how the corporate world is still thinking in terms of those human resources versus those human relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and is letting all of these employees, go away. And these employees, they're no longer isolated.
No.
They're no longer in their own offices at home or their own homes or whatever else. These employees are on the web.
Mm-hmm.
They're connecting, they're collaborating, they're building giant networks of freelancers.
Yeah.
Right? And those freelancers are eventually going to eat out the pie.
Yeah.
If they don't look carefully into it, they want to start eating that pie, and it's already happening. I'm not sure whether I read this report earlier on in the year or something like that, where we're saying that nearly 40% of the employee workforce in the US are freelancers.
Wow.
That's huge.
It's enormous.
That's huge, right? And we're going to see more of that. So we're going to see that shift from, large corporate employee organizations into smaller corporations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the work, obviously, is not going to shrink. It's actually going to get even bigger. And what's going to happen is that all of these freelancers are going to just hoover around to just beat their work, do their work, and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that in terms of employee engagement, things are going to get really interesting, because the people that you have to retain, they're going to see that other pasture as much greener.
Yeah.
And that's when you will have a huge challenge in terms of retaining that talent, right? And that's when employee engagement is going to kick in big time, as what you were suggesting in the blog post, with all of the various different elements in terms of that focused engagement, in terms of the well-being, in terms of the information and fairness and everything else. And let's face it, one of the things that is happening there is, and I know that some people will tell you that this is not about the money.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, this is about the money.
Yeah.
Right? There's been lots of research that has been done, and apparently, there's this magic figure of the 75 grand a year, right? That makes you a happy employee, so that you focus on other things than just money.
Mm-hmm.
The average knowledge worker in a corporate environment is not on that range yet. So money to them still matters.
Well, indeed.
Right? And all of the other things as well, don't take me wrong. You want to have appreciation, you want to have recognition, you want to have a good job that you feel happy about, that you feel you're contributing and everything else. But at the end of the day, you also want to go and pay your bills. Right?
Well, indeed. I mean, there was I remember there's two stories of things that you reminded me of, and based on two conversations I've had in the past. One was with a guy by the name of Saeed Hassan, who runs a tech company in, I think it's Vancouver. called Response Tech. And he's originally from the northwest of England in Lancashire, so he takes a very northern approach to some of these things, if you understand what I mean by that.
Yeah, I do.
And he said, you know what? Employee engagement for me is really simple. Is that, he says, pay people a fair and competitive wage, give them work to do that matters, and ask for their opinion.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple, that's right there. 3 mantras, right? So you give them a good salary for what they do and their skills, because sometimes, most of those employees, they feel that they're not getting paid enough because their skills are, much more relevant than what they get paid for.
Yep.
You give them work that matters. That's huge.
Yes.
Right? And then you listen to their opinions. This is like an open dialogue, go back and forth. This is the two-street way of employee engagement. That's right at the heart of the matter of what it is all about.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I saw, last year I was in Brighton on the Meaning Conference, which was still is one of my favorite events because I learned so much from that event. And there was this guy from Denmark, and Alex is going to forgive me because his surname is just too complicated.
I was the happiness guy because I was there.
Correct, yes. Correct. And he talked about how at work, the only thing that matters is results and relationships.
Yep.
So those two things that Alex mentioned, as well as the three key items that you mentioned there, which is basically having a good pay.
Yeah.
You got it all.
Yeah.
You got it all. And what is interesting is how simple it is, and yet how most organizations just don't get it, right? Because if it were like a complex formula or whatever else, okay, I could take that. But it's not. It's just as simple as that.
Yes.
So what's the second story? You had
the second story. So the second
right?
story was one, because you mentioned about how smaller companies are doing really, really smart things, and how particularly they're focusing more on the relationship side of things. So I know this other company. It's run by a gentleman by the name of Henry Stewart. He runs a company called Happy.
Right.
And they have a policy where if they have to either fire somebody for whatever, gross indiscretion or whatever, or actually have to let somebody go for whatever reason, what they do as a company is they help them find another job.
Right. Which is fair.
Because it's fair, and that's important to them.
Yeah.
And
but
the impact it has on the people is almost, it adds a safety net, and it tells them that almost that we care, but it's also that it's just feel looked after.
It did, and it's not just that you're being looked after, right? But it's also a way for the company to say, okay, things may not have worked out. We're really sorry for whatever the reason. You had to go and make this drastic decision, but we're not going to leave you alone on your own, right? That's employee engagement beyond measure. People will go and find a new job, and they will still remember you dearly for doing that.
And
why?
Because they will advocate on your behalf as well. It's just
right, exactly. And why would they do that? Because there's one single keyword there that I keep coming up with as well, which is key to employee engagement, or the way, at least the way I see it, which is caring. Yeah. You care about people. There's not enough caring in the corporate world right now, right? And this I translate to basically of companies not caring about their people, because let's face it, if you as a company have got trouble, or you get into trouble financially or whatever else, the first thing you're going to think is, how am I going to survive?
Yes.
Right? And the first solution they're going to come up is fire people, right? So if you have, as a company, if you have to give a choice between the company and the people, you choose the company and then let people go.
Yeah.
Now, this approach from this other story is, okay, I need to make a choice of sticking with the company, but I'm not going to let you behind.
Yes.
I'm going to help you out as much as I can to help you find a safe job, because at some point in time, if things go better, I may want to have you back.
Yes.
And I want to have that relationship with you again so that we can continue nurturing that relationship. That's a great story. Two very powerful stories. My God. Absolutely. Love them. I will need to listen to the replay again.
Because the interesting thing about about Henry's story was that a lot of it was inspired by, and I'm sure you've read this book, Maverick by Ricardo Semler.
No, I haven't, but I'm probably sure for my summer reading.
Okay, so it's based on a company called Semco in Brazil.
Right, I know Semco, yeah.
Yeah, And so it's a book that Ricardo wrote about him taking over the business and transforming it into pretty much more of a democratic workplace.
Right.
And me personally, I read it. It's probably one of the, well, it still is probably the most profound and probably the best business book I've ever read. And I read it back in the early 90s.
Right.
And Henry read it as well, and it just transformed his thinking. And it's more about thinking about your business as a community, but also caring about people and trusting the ability that you have with all those minds in it. You can't know everything, but actually, if you ask for people's opinion, they can generally figure out what the best solution is.
Which is, it's introducing a very interesting concept that I got exposed to last year as a result of the Millennium Conference in Brighton, right? Mm-hmm. Which was that whole concept of employee-owned businesses,
yeah,
even large corporations,
yes,
and how they actually turn around completely the whole notion of employee engagement, right? And also, I think there also was a Steve Daniel who blogged about it in the Forbes article just recently of how we need to flip that focus on shareholders and instead focus on the stakeholders. So basically the employees owning the business versus the shareholders, because eventually that's what you will have back again what we mentioned earlier on, which is caring. If you as an employee own part of the company, whatever the part, you will feel that you own something, right? I actually describe it with a much more mundane example in terms of people when you're working for an organization. Typically, they give you their own computing environment, which seems to be more restricted than anything else because it's mostly blocked in terms of what you can install, but it's a corporate machine, right? Now, from that perspective, as an employee, you probably don't pay much attention to it because you think, okay, well, if someone steals it, okay, never mind, I'll report it or whatever else, and then I get a new one the next morning, right? Now, flip that over and introduce the bring your own device mantra, right? Where you actually own your own computing environment, and the only thing that you care about is that your machine does not get stolen. Why? Because it's your money, it's your hard-working money that gets stolen, right? So you're going to care more from that perspective about what you actually have at your disposal than you don't. So the same thing goes, if you own part of the company, you will care more for what you do.
Yes.
By all means, right? And it's interesting to see how, interestingly enough, most people will go and say like, yeah, but could the corporate world survive with that model? And I tell them, I don't know whether it would survive, but right now with the current model, we're not.
Yeah.
So what do we have to lose?
Well, it's worth looking at because at least if it turns around and says like, well, actually, this is an option. It's something that's there. Some people are doing some things sort of right, and there's an opportunity to learn from that and actually to start to change. I mean, it's like, I guess you could turn around and say, well, look, there's an ice age coming, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do about it.
Exactly, and one of the interesting things that happens in there is that even if it fails for whatever reason, at least you have tried things out. You have looked for different models. You have looked for different ways of viewing and executing business. And eventually what you would want to do is how keen and how willing you are on learning, right? Because even if it fails, there still is a learning lesson there, right?
Well, exactly.
And it's something that you can probably go and apply. And I'm saying that like even if it fails, because I don't think that it will fail. And in fact, I basically have been saying for a little while now that that's the only way we're going to survive as businesses in the 21st century.
Well, I think it's also we need to break through that idea that when people talk about change initiatives, that you move from one state to another, and it moves from a place of inertia to another place of inertia. And actually, it's not. You actually just need to bust the inertia and realize and build a culture and an organization that is continuously changing and morphing and adapting and flexing and all of those different sort of things, which is anathema to the way that we're currently structured, and particularly with many large organizations, in both in the public sector and also the private sector and the public sector.
Right, which is interesting because what you're doing there is you're basically expanding the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right, and something so traditional as the firewall, which has always been this massive thick wall where you have got internal doings and you have got external doings or whatever else, it becomes a lot more porous. And eventually it's all, or the vast majority of the interactions that can happen, unless you have a need to protect your intellectual capital and copyrights or whatever else,
Mm-hmm.
the rest of those various different interactions, they're going to happen in an open environment. And that open environment is the open web,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what's going to, that's what's going to accelerate information and information flows, right? So that mentality of knowledge is power is going to basically be a whole lot more reduced, if not disappear altogether, and it will be amplified with that knowledge shared is power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that eventually will go back again into how you will be able to retain your employee workforce based on that meaningful work that you will give them, but also giving them the resources they need for that job. Let's not forget about that, right? Because right now there's plenty of managing by fear,
Yes.
versus plenty of leading by inspiration, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that is happening here is that you're basically not just getting the full potential of the employee. And the way I describe it is, when you're going to start a new job, typically you're excited,
Yes.
right? Because you see that that's exactly what you were looking for, and you went through 4 or 5 different interviews of hard work, and you eventually made it, and you feel like, my God, this is going to be the job of my lifetime. That's the mentality that you go to.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks later, 2 months later, the whole thing changes. So I keep telling people why. What happens? What happens in that initial period of 2, 3 months, 6 months, where people change from being totally inspired, really motivated about doing work, and all of a sudden it goes, oh yeah, this is just like another job, right?
It strikes me as being, because it's a very similar situation to when you get sold something.
Right.
And then you get excited by it, I get sold, and then it sort of arises, or delivery, or the performance of the product or service that you've been sold, as it were, just doesn't live up to expectations. So
That's very true.
So yeah, exactly. And so I think it's a kind of really interesting sort of inside outside look at things, because we can empathise the way that we feel as customers when that happens to us.
But indeed, eventually one of the things that we're seeing, or at least that I'm seeing, in terms of customers, is that purchase by impulse is no longer there, right?
No.
We have become a lot smarter, in a good sense of the word, in terms of how we have identified our business needs or business problems that we want to fix and address, and see whether products would actually do it or not.
Yes.
And the initial sale that you just described, sales cycle that you just described there, does no longer work. And the reason for that is because, customers are very informed nowadays. They talk to one another. They talk about your products.
Yep.
They talk about your employee workforce. They look up your employee workforce to see what kind of expertise they have. They look into what other people are saying about your business, about your brand, and then they start making up their own opinions. And they build up their own image about you, and then they say, okay, right, so here's you, here's me, I've got this business problem, and all about you, can you deliver?
Yeah. The other
And
thing
you are, as the vendor, you go like, wow, that's doing a lot of homework. I say, yes, that's exactly the whole point.
But also, what it does do is it raises expectations on their part, and so when you don't deliver, that's why you see the kind of the backlash that organisations are trying to go, my God, why does that happen? Why is that so vociferous for him? And
Exactly, which is what I keep telling people about, that, customers today are completely different from what they were like 10, 15 years ago in terms of being a lot more demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And you, as a vendor, having to be meeting up all of those various different high demands, but most importantly, is keeping up with those demands, right? That's when the engagement will kick in, because, if you just basically do a sell and then you move on to something else, the customer is probably going to call and be very angry with you.
Yes.
Right? Or very disappointed as well, even, right? This is more about, once you actually finalize that opportunity to meet those demands, it's how you're going to keep up with those demands, because, that's what customers would expect from you. If you, and this is one of the interesting things, because, all vendors are talking about how do you keep your customers engaged. You don't. It's them, the ones who decide if they want to be engaged or not with you, depending on what you deliver and depending on what you have to offer.
Sure.
And if you don't have what it takes to deliver what they need, don't even bother bringing in the whole topic of engagement, because you're just basically going to piss them off. And believe me, a pissed off customer nowadays is not going to help you at all whatsoever.
No. So I'm just conscious of time, Luis, because we could talk about this all day, I'm pretty sure.
I think so.
So the one thing that and we've covered quite a lot of ground, but also the one thing that the readers don't know is that you embarked on. You talked about yourself being a bit of an outlier, a bit of a maverick, but actually, I can't remember how long it is now. But you've embarked on life without email for at least sort of 12 months now. I think, is that right?
No, it's a lot more than that. 6 years.
Blimey, 6 years.
Yeah,
Crikey.
I started in February 2008 with this. With the move.
And how so? How's that going? And what's the plans for sort of 2013 and beyond? I mean, are you going to further whittle the tools that you use down, or is it?
Yeah, it's been to be honest, it's been a fascinating journey. Talking about changing a life career, it certainly has, because one of the things, most of the stuff that we have talked about today is how I feel as well in terms of leaving email behind, right, and,
Yeah.
and ditching corporate email, because one of the things that when I first started doing this, I started it as an initiative to sort of like fight back the status quo,
Yes.
by challenging the status quo, challenging that inertia of how people take everything for granted without even thinking, right? And how people were abusing email to kill each other's productivity just because that's how they were taught that they could work with, in terms of, political and bullying emails and, delegation machine, which is what email is very good at, and all that stuff, right? Now, that was my initial intention, thinking, okay, I'm going to be fighting this tool. Now, eventually what I did learn throughout the whole journey, which is how it relates as well very nicely to this conversation, is that eventually I discovered that I was not fighting the system. I was fighting a good number of bad behaviors.
You're right.
Right? And those bad behaviors, or those behaviors, have helped me turn things around into, instead of kind of like protecting and holding my knowledge, it's actually a lot different. It's more in terms of how open and how transparent I am in what I do. So at work, where we have all these enterprise social networking tools and everything else, I just basically keep telling people the way for me to lead by example is tell them, unless it is something really confidential of a very sensitive nature, right? Which I still host some of those conversations through instant messaging or through email. There is no reason why the rest cannot take place out there in open spaces, whether it's internal or external, right? So that journey still continues. It's been fascinating because over the last 5 years until the beginning of this year, I was averaging sort of like 15 emails per week. So that's like 2 emails per day. This year something has happened. I'm still trying to figure out what it was, and we're already like in July, right? But and I don't think I changed jobs as well. I moved from the software group into the CIO organization, and I don't think it is due to that alone. But I have seen how I have gone back into getting a lot more email than I used to get.
Right.
And that is so and I think I have got a theory. I haven't been able to prove it yet because it's a bit controversial, right? But the thing is that I have had a lot more emails. So right now I'm doing an average of 32 emails per week. Right. Which is like 3 times more than what I used to get last year.
Okay.
And I suspect that the reason why I'm saying that is because people are starting to wear off on the whole notion of social. And in terms of not having enough time to learn, adjust, adapt, and embrace these tools.
Yeah.
And defaulting back to what they know deep in their brains, which is basically processing email.
Yes.
Right? So instead of doing all of that exploration, instead of doing all of that learning, instead of just basically finding new ways of doing work, doing these social tools, what people are doing is they're reverting back to email. Why are they doing that? Because of work pressures, right? Work is not diminishing; it's increasing even more. The work pressure, the additional element where you could be the next one out, right?
Yeah.
That also adds up into people telling that they just need to focus on what really work and what they really get paid for, and that's it, because they don't want to go and stand out or they don't want to do anything else. And I'm seeing that trend coming up very big in terms of how people are basically just defaulting back to what they have been doing all along, because that's the comfortable environment that they have lived with, right?
It's not a growth mentality, though, is it?
No, it's not. But and here's the thing, because people tell me, I've been talking to a few people about that theory, and I tell them, okay, so who do you blame? I said, well, I probably wouldn't blame anyone, but if you would push me against the wall and you tell me who do you blame, probably businesses. Businesses in general, because they're not, for the same reason that you just mentioned, they're not allowing the employees to grow. And that's one of the worst things that you can have. But then again, I see the point why businesses are doing it, which is, if I don't allow my employees to grow, I still retain the control over my employees.
Yeah.
Which is, I go like, oh my God, no.
We're back to square one.
Right, exactly. Don't go that way, right? So people tell me, okay, so are you going to give up on giving up on email? And say, no, I'm even more stronger now than ever before. And I have become a lot more of a radical approach to it. And I just basically, what I tell people now, between now and 5.5 years ago when I started, is that now I have got 5.5 years of more experience than I had before.
Yeah.
But the intent is still there. I mean, I would want people to grow. I would want people to explore, to use these tools, to connect with people, to converse, to, discuss, to learn. That's part of our human nature. We cannot neglect that. It's happening already on the social web. Why can't we have it in the working environment, right? It's the most liberating movement that we can probably have ever since the Industrial Revolution, right? It's just another way of doing business, right? It's back again into, what would you want to have? You want to have critical thinkers that own the work they do, or do you want to have a bunch of sheep that you pay, or like you mentioned, a bunch of kids and children that you want to govern?
Yeah,
right?
sure.
I can imagine how business executives may want to have the second pack. I'm fighting for the first pack. And I will continue to fight for the first pack.
Well, I'm going to fight with you, Luis.
Good. Excellent.
So, I always end these conversations with one question.
Okay.
And that is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Yeah, why not? Let's go for it. So here's the thing, right? So in this movement of the world without email, or life without email, for a good number of years, for the last 2-3 years, people have been asking me, why don't you put a community around it? Why don't you build a real movement with real momentum for everyone else to go and chip in and participate and share their experiences and grow and learn and everything else? So after a long debate with a number of various different people, I said, okay, so maybe we're ready now to have that community. So yes, we do have that community on Google+. So if you guys go into Google+, and you search there for Life Without Email, a community will come up. We have got like around 4 moderators right now. I'm one of them. So four co-leads there. I will welcome everyone who wants to continue growing to join us there. Because, it's not, the conversations that we're having there is not necessarily around how to stop using email, which we also tackle, but it's also how do we provoke the next generation of businesses.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating topic. And I spend most of my online time nowadays over there as well.
Luis, that's fascinating, and thank you. And we've covered a lot of ground sort of there, and I think I'll give our readers and listeners a bit of a rest now.
All right. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's been delightful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.